Good afternoon, everybody, and a very warm welcome to the third roundtable within the Regenerative Surrey programme. My name is Bill Biddell, and I have the very pleasant duty of chairing this afternoon's conversation. Just as a little background, I work at Hampton Estate. We're situated at the western end of Surrey, between Farnham and Guildford, with the A31 Hogsback, our northern boundary. The estate is fortunate to have a variety of soil types, from light sand to heavy clay, and some pretty chalky stuff on the Hogsback. We therefore have a variety of landscapes and habitats, and realise that we now need to take all estate decisions based on an environmental approach. Our farming is regenerative wherever possible. We mob graze our pedigree beef herd. We're using predator control in our hop growing enterprise. We're pretty niche. We grow timber commercially and through our woodlands and let irrigated land to vegetable growers. We have been in every countryside stewardship scheme since their inception and continue to be so. We also realise that we are really well placed to promote biodiversity net gain, and we've dabbled in carbon markets through our woodland planting. We commissioned an environmental audit of the estate and have been working through its findings in order to understand the values we could have and the ongoing management this will need. I personally am fascinated to understand more how our own natural capital assets can be monetized successfully. And I think that's the reason why we're all here this afternoon. And I'm definitely here to learn as well as to chair. I'm so pleased that we have an expert panel who will give us the benefit of all their experience. However, by way of a reminder, this is the third and final roundtable in the programme. The prior two roundtables explored how water can be a focus for nature-based projects in Surrey and how technology can support the development of projects. Learnings from these roundtables will inform the next stage in Regenerative Surrey, where we will map and plan new nature-based solutions in the county. Today, we aim to explore how we can mobilise private finance to deliver more nature-based solutions in Surrey. And to fulfil this aim, we have a collection of experts on the panel who are together offering solutions which encourage investment in nature. With their unique insight, we can start to understand the next steps for delivering more projects in Surrey. We will start the roundtable with a series of introductions before heading into facilitated discussion. At the end of the roundtable, I will ask the panel two of the most voted questions in the Q&A. So please submit your questions and vote for your favourites throughout the roundtable. That would be terrific. Let's start with some introductions. Panelists, I'd be really grateful if you would share a bit about yourselves and the solutions you're working on, and how they can help deliver nature-based solutions in Surrey. I suggest we start with Mark Lebus, founder and CEO of LC Energy. Mark.
Thank you, Bill. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mark Lebus, and as Bill mentioned, founded a company called LC Energy back in 2007. The business focuses very strongly on renewable energy, and with that, a fairly hefty exposure to woodland creation and woodland management. So we have a very vested interest, particularly in our local Regenerative Surrey guys. Alongside our renewables, we also have a division within the company that focuses on sustainability. And whilst that's a very broad subject, we understand in the context of this discussion today, most of our particular efforts are focused on carbon footprinting, carbon reduction, and carbon offsetting for SMEs, particularly in the local area. That for us is our way that we create a roadmap for individual companies to understand how they can plan for the next 15, 20, 30 years or generation. And it's heavily involved in connecting businesses to nature-based solutions. My views today are that I'm very interested to understand from my fellow panelists and some of the questions, what are the challenges that people are finding out there? What are the perceptions? I hope today that we can help to answer some of those or all of them, but I'm here to learn as well.
Thanks very much, Mark. That's terrific. I wonder if I could ask Niel now to give us a little bit of background. Niel is director at the Forest Canopy Foundation, amongst other hats that he wears.
Thank you, Bill, very much, and good afternoon, everybody. So two hats, really. My day job hat. My day job, I run a family business with my wife based in North Oxfordshire, where we do forestry and landscaping. But that's not what we're here to talk about today. My real hat for today is I'm director of the Forest Canopy Foundation. Now, this was set up about 18 months ago, and it's the professional forestry industry's response to the climate crisis, trying to increase woodland creation at scale across the UK. Boris set us a challenge a year or two back to, by the end of this parliament, to get to 30,000 hectares per year in the UK. That's about up to 10,000 hectares per year in England. Last year, England achieved 2,100 hectares. So we're a long way off the challenge. So we set this up to try and support this. It's made up of a group of independent private forestry sector companies, currently about 15 of us, but expanding all the time. And we passionately believe the only way to do this is to work as a collective. So we utilize the skills and the professional heritage of each of the companies involved. And we're creating an innovative scheme where we're combining public, so that's the grant schemes that you can get Forestry Commission, and private finance and carbon, and we'll talk more about that later, to enable landowners to plant trees in a financially viable manner, which has been very difficult up to now. We're very, very quality driven, and we're working with our independent auditor and another fellow not-for-profit, FCF is a not-for-profit, to ensure that all, and we're calling them canopy woodlands, are designed to a first-class forestry standard. And we're managing all those by all the expert providers up to a minimum of 30 years, which again is very unusual in the forestry sector. So it means that we can look at the wide range of natural capital benefits, carbon sequestration, improved biodiversity, filtration of air pollutants, water quality, and of course communities. So planting trees opens landowners up to all these other potential income streams. And so hopefully we can talk a bit more about them as we progress. And we've got one scheme over the line, which as we talk a bit more, I'll explain a bit more about that. But that's enough for me for just now.
Niel, that's terrific. Thank you very much. Dan, if we could have a little bit from yourself, please. Daniel Barwick, who is Policy Manager for DEFRA's Green Finance team.
Yeah, thank you, Bill, and hello, everyone. As Bill says, I work in the Department of the Environment and Food and Rural Affairs and have done for the last 20 plus years. And I'm currently working in the department's Green Finance Policy team. And the aim of us as a team is to mobilise more private sector investment into projects that are aimed at protecting and enhancing the natural environment. So through setting the right policy and delivery conditions for that to happen in line with the government's 25-year environment plan and green finance strategy. So the three key themes that we're progressing work through at the moment are: number one, looking at what's needed to help shape high integrity markets and ecosystem services, such as nature-based carbon, biodiversity net gain, and catchment services, so that these markets operate and interact effectively, including the key issue of how these kind of credits and units and benefits that are generated through these markets can, and importantly, cannot be stacked and bundled within a project. And we're working closely with the Financing Nature Recovery Coalition on this, who are looking at and coming up with recommendations on what's required in terms of market design, market governance, and market operation. The second theme is around stimulating investment through catalysing a project pipeline and also using public funding to de-risk and crowd in additional private investment. So we're doing this through our Natural Environment Investment Readiness Fund, which provides grants to help nature projects become investment ready. And we're also scoping a public-private blended impact fund, which would invest in a portfolio of green finance nature projects. And we're working very closely with other DEFRA teams to ensure other sources of public funding can facilitate additional private sector investment. So, for example, the teams who are currently designing the new environmental land management scheme and the Nature for Climate Fund. And then the third theme, which may not be as immediately relevant to today's session, is looking at ways of shifting mainstream private finance flows away from activities harmful for nature and towards nature positive outcomes. So we're doing this through supporting the Global Task Force on Nature-related Financial Disclosures and working with the Treasury on developing the UK's sustainable finance taxonomy, which will help categorise financial products in terms of whether they are green or not green, and hopefully driving out greenwashing in the market. So for context, the Chancellor's recent spending review announcement included a target to attract £500 million per annum of private sector investment into nature's recovery by 2027, and increasing to £1 billion per annum by 2030. So I think that underscores how government sees a lot of potential to scale up markets in ecosystem services, and there will be a lot of attention placed on it going forward. So really looking forward to the discussion today and hearing views from others.
Daniel, thank you very much indeed for that. Really, really helpful. I just wanted to kick off the whole thing with a question really to each member of the panel in turn. What do you feel the key opportunities enabling the flow of private finance in nature? I wondered, Daniel, if we could start with you on that and give us some examples, if you can, just to elucidate that. Because certainly from my point of view and our point of view, as a farmer land manager, it's about how we can be practical about these things and how we get there. We know there's land here. It's putting the two strands together of the finance on the one side, the land on the other. How do we do it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think looking at what the private sector is willing to pay for, I think the kind of areas where we're seeing transactions happen are around nature-based carbon. So we've got the Woodland Carbon Code and the Peatland Code, and there are other codes in development at the moment around things like salt marsh, soil, hedgerows, all looking at, and even kelp actually, looking at how these things can sequester carbon, how we can measure that and verify it so that they can generate saleable units. We've got biodiversity net gain coming down the track. The Environment Bill was enacted last week. That's going to lead to a requirement on developers to not just offset their biodiversity impacts, but provide a 10% net gain, which in turn is going to lead to demand for biodiversity units in the market from developers. So I think that's an opportunity. And the other area where we're starting to see transaction happen is around catchment services. So water companies, developers and others paying for nature-based solutions that bring around water quality benefits, but also natural flood management benefits as well. The examples I'd give here are, so we've supported a project along with the Environment Agency and Esme Fairbairn Foundation in the Northwest that is on the verge of securing private sector investment in the Wyre catchment, led by the Rivers Trust, which is looking to put in place a range of kind of nature-based solutions to tackle flooding problems in the area, with revenues coming from a mix of private and public sector organisations. So there's the water company and Flood Re, but also the Environment Agency and the local authority, all entering into a long-term contract, which will provide a kind of steady revenue stream to repay the upfront investment that's being used to put in place these various nature-based solutions in terms of leaky dams and earth bunds and things like that, but also lots of tree planting through a grant via the Woodland Trust that is being brought about through the Nature for Climate Fund. So it's a good example of blending both the public and private upfront investment needed to put the interventions in place, but also the revenue stream is also created by a kind of mix of public and private entities that are willing to pay for the benefits.
Excellent. Yeah, thanks for that. That's very helpful. And it's always good to have some examples of that. Neil, it seems to come to you next on the same question, because I think following on from Dan's thoughts about woodland there, and I think you've been doing work with a largish private estate as well.
Yeah, no, very much so. I mean, it's thank you, Dan. That was a brilliant sort of intro to the question, I suppose. How we look at it, I suppose, why aren't woodlands being planted to the extent that they should be? And I think if we go back a step, we look at you're taking land out of production on the whole, either out of production or out of grazing. So why would a landowner want to do that? Well, he's only going to do that, I think, if he at least equals what he's doing currently. So if he's marginal land now, then it'll probably be marginal later. But he needs to make sure that he's not losing financially, I think. So with Brexit, we've obviously coming out to the Common Agricultural Policy. We've got basic payment schemes stopping. It's a great opportunity for that landowner to rethink and reevaluate what's in it for them in terms of the land, what they can do on the land. They're going to lose that basic payment scheme. And I think on marginal land, particularly as grades 3, 4 land, and maybe worse, hill land, they're going to struggle to keep going what they were doing before. So they're going to rethink and say, right, what else could I do on that land? One of those things they could do is trees. So, okay, let's plant some trees on it. We go to the Forestry Commission, we get a grant for it. The grant will cover quite a proportion of it, but will not cover the full maintenance to, say, let's say year 30. And I think 30 is a really important date. That at the time, it's what biodiversity net gain is working towards. It's a 30-year period. And actually at year 30, trees are fully established. They can probably stand on their own 2 feet. They don't need deer control anymore. They do still need squirrel control. And actually in the UK, we've got a major issue with squirrels. So it's very important to get a tree to that 30-year period. So if you do your costings to year 30, how much extra do we need to give the landowner to make it work for them? Well, we've done some sums and we've come up with some numbers. It obviously depends on where you are in the UK and all this sort of thing. But you need an injection of capital on top of the very good grants that the Forestry Commission have just come up with. They've just come up with the UCO, the England Woodland Creation Offer, much better grant than we've ever had before, but it still doesn't fill the gap. You've also got to remember that that landowner is going to want some income foregone that they're no longer getting. So how can we join those together? That's where we can look at the natural capital benefits. The easiest one at the moment that we can look at is carbon, because generally there is a carbon market out there. The other ones that we'll probably talk about later as we discuss more are all these other natural capital. Biodiversity net gain. It's great, but what are the units? How much is a unit? Can we say how many units there are? Water quality. It's another one. The units are a bit undefinable. Real strong interest in there. Flood alleviation. Who does the maths on it? So what we've done is our first scheme, which is quite exciting, is this winter. In fact, we started planting it or started fencing it a couple of weeks back, is through the UCO, the Woodland Creation Offer by the Forestry Commission. It's on Blenheim Estate, big local estate to us here in Oxfordshire. One of the landed estates, got a vast amount of land, really keen to plant trees. They couldn't quite get it over the line. We've managed to go into partnership with Morgan Sindall, the big construction company, the national construction company. They wanted to not only offset their or mitigate for their carbon emissions, they wanted to also do good. Now, do good is a lovely expression, isn't it? Now, what does it mean? They wanted to be seen to be planting trees for the right reason. You know, if they wanted to do just carbon, they'd have gone to Scotland and say, let's plant it in Scotland. We can do it very cheaply. Woodland Carbon Code up there. It's very cheap if you use it. It's 20 quid a tonne. That's not what they wanted to do. They didn't want to plant acres of Sitka spruce in big plantations. So at Blenheim, we've designed a scheme with them. It's 12 or 14 blocks of woodlands in the Dawn and the Glyme Valley. They're on the slightly sloping land, so it's protecting the Blenheim Lakes from silting up. They're about to be desilted, so that's flood alleviation and water quality ticks those boxes. By planting a mixture of species, mainly broadleaf, but with some coniferous element in there, we're getting the biodiversity. We're planting climate resilient species so that we tick the climate resilient species box. We've got new footpaths going in, so we're getting recreation and health and well-being, and we're doing a forest school. So all of those together have come together to do this block. So Morgan Sindall were happy to pay an amount of money. It's not per tonne as such a carbon. If you did divide it by per tonne of carbon, it's a very high price, but they were willing to do that because it's so much more than carbon. And I think that's a really exciting way of looking at it, especially in lowland England. So I'm just going to stop there for now, but I'm sure Mark will want to say something on the subject, but we could discuss more of the various other benefits.
Neil, that's terrific. Thank you. That is such an interesting start to the whole thing, because I want to come on to markets in due course. Mark, please, your take on this initial question. You know, what are the key opportunities enabling the flow of private finance in nature?
Goodness, thank you, Bill. I don't really want to repeat or overlap too much of what Neil said, but just from our experience of this particular subject, and in discussion with a number of investors, what we're trying to do is to understand clearly what their objectives are and to get to the bottom of why they want to do this and what their intentions are. And it comes down to sort of a couple of key things. And this sort of ties into how to give the opportunities, or how to tempt investors into these opportunities, really. Firstly, it always comes down to cost. What's it going to cost me, and what's the benefit to me? And that can be done on a purely monetary value, as everybody understands. But clearly, as Neil pointed out, there's a much bigger value here. And this leads on to the sort of second element of this, and that is that companies now see, I think, much more of a corporate risk by not evaluating what their carbon footprint is, and then once they've reduced whatever they can, looking at that offset. And the third point I'd like to put into play at this particular point is that it's all too easy at this stage to offset your carbon and buy a couple of thousand acres in Paraguay, or do something else equally good. However, what we're trying to establish here is how to offset locally. And the key message that I would put forward is that really the polluter should pay. So if you're in an area and you have a carbon footprint in an area, then ultimately you ought to be offsetting in that area as well. And by that, I mean, it could be Southeast, it could be local county, it could be UK based if you have such a widespread. And that then leads us on to identifying opportunities within our particular Regenerative Surrey project, and trying to identify areas of land, whether it's with landowners like yourself, Bill, or public sector organizations, particularly where they've got vacant and derelict land or less value land, to tie or match the objectives of a corporate investor into a local offset program.
Yeah, thank you very much. Strikes me that there are markets emerging in all these throughout. And they're not, as far as I can see, they're not that sophisticated at the moment, but they're all fledgling. And Dan, just to ask you one question as a follow-up from yours, I was interested that you mentioned the Esme Fairbairn Foundation were involved in one of in your particular example. They're, I think I'm right in saying they're a pretty large funding organisation, charitable funding organisation. So was that because there was lack of funds, or what was what do you know what the reason was that they were involved in that? Because that would then suggest that there was land on one side, there was private finance on another, but also there had to be some sort of charitable arm to make this thing work.
Yeah, so we work with Esme quite closely on a number of things. They're a large philanthropic funder, they're a foundation, and they're very interested in helping support the development of natural capital markets in the UK. So their involvement, as ours was, and the Environment Agency was, it was a forerunner to our investment readiness fund, really. So we provided grants to get the project up to an investable level, if you like. We funded 4 pilot projects. I can put a link in the chat later to a bit more information about them. And the example I gave was one of those. So this was kind of, a pre-revenue stage before they were ready to go to investors, before the nature-based solutions, the environmental interventions were established. So it was to help with things like contracting and modeling and getting the business case ready. So it's that kind of pre-investment stage to help the project get to an investable level. So these are obviously kind of early stage markets, and so we think there's that kind of public and philanthropic support that's justified in kind of getting them to an investable level. And then what we're keen to do through the Natural Environment Investment Readiness Fund, where we're providing this kind of technical assistance and capacity building support is just not develop a kind of pipeline of projects, but also take the learning from those projects and any kind of outputs they produce in terms of kind of standard legal contracts and case studies and things like that, and making those widely available to the sector and to the public as a whole, really. And we're working to do that at the moment, again, in partnership with the Esme Fairbairn Foundation, but also the Green Finance Institute and the Ecosystems Knowledge Network.
Dan, that's a great answer. Thank you very much, because it always strikes me that when a new market is emerging, that there are so many big questions to ask about these things legally, and as you say, through contracts and through actually setting up the nuts and bolts of deals. It's very, very hard to get that sort of sorted, really. And with that kind of backing from the Esme Fairbairn Foundation, I'm sure that has speeded things along. Niel, you've got something to tell us on that, I'm sure.
Yeah, it was just following on from Dan, and I think actually the whole sector, the most exciting thing about it is, as Dan was saying, the Esme Fairbairn Foundation are working with DEFRA and Environment Agency. They're working together. Isn't that great? And I think the whole thing, what I've noticed in the last probably 18 months, probably last 12 months, really 12 to 18 months, is that the whole sector is starting to play as one a lot more. I look back 10 years, Forestry Commission, for instance, used to be the authority who told us what to do, and we had to accept it. Now what they're doing is they're ringing us up saying, what would you like us to do? We want you to plant more trees. What do you need us to do to facilitate that? And then they're talking to, all the teams are talking to each other. Historically, DEFRA and the Environment Agency and Natural England and Forestry Commission, they were all in their own little silos doing their own thing. It's lovely to see them all getting around a table, talking to each other, and coming together. Like the new nature tool that's just come out, or came out earlier a couple of months back. It was launched by the chairmans or chairpeople of I think Forestry Commission, Natural England, and DEFRA or something. I can't quite remember the people, but they launched it together. And I think it's so nice. At last, we're getting a bit of collaboration, and I think that's where we'll see real progress.
Dan, could I ask you just another question? And sorry to keep plugging away at you, but the Natural Environment Investment Readiness Fund opened for a second time. Can you just give us a flavour of? Do you know of who is applying for that? Did you have actual applications from farmers and land managers, or is it more from water authorities, or who is actually applying at the moment?
So it's a real mix. So we have applications from the private sector, from farmers and land managers, mainly kind of groups of farmers and land managers, also environmental NGOs, local authorities. So yeah, it's a real mix. And I think that speaks to the kind of diversity of the project types, actually. So some of them are kind of what we're calling market enablers. So I referred to them before, developing new codes to verify carbon in different types of habitats and things like that. Whereas the majority of projects are kind of projects on the ground that are looking to, plant trees, restore peatland, and all those good things. For round two, I think it would be, it would be good to address some of the gaps. So we didn't get many marine projects funded in the first round. I think more projects led by farmers and land managers would be fantastic. And yeah, private sector led projects in the whole, more of those would be great. But what I would say about that, although probably the majority of the projects are led by either environmental NGOs or local authorities, I think all of them have kind of either private sector or farmer and land manager participants in them, because obviously, you can't do anything unless you can work with landowners and farm owners and to bring about those environmental benefits.
Yeah, absolutely. Niel, just thinking on those environmental benefits, could you give us a bit more about carbon at the moment? The carbon market, because it's a fascinating one.
It is an interesting one. So there's a carbon auction. So to do anything to do with carbon in the voluntary market, currently there is only the Wood and Carbon Code. So you apply to the Wood and Carbon Code, which you need to do prior to starting any planting. So it's I say it's straightforward, it's not. It's quite a complicated form to fill in. You fill in all about your species and where it is and land types and all that sort of thing. And it's got a calculator in there, and it works out a predicted amount of carbon that that woodland will sequester over a period of years, and you can then interrogate it. It was dreamt up 10 to 12 years ago. It needs a bit of updating. If you talk to the guys who did it, they would say it does need updating. It's probably on the conservative side, which at least is the right way around. You're likely to produce more carbon than it says, but it is the tool and it works, and we need to use it. So how do we then use it? If you're wanting to sell your carbon, there is no right or wrong way to do it. It's entirely up to you. And I noticed one of the questions down in the chat thing is if I was a panelist, if I was a farmer, would I plant trees? So how does it work? You can sell that carbon up front, or you can sell it once you have created it, in effect. So what generally happens, so like at Blenheim, what the scheme I was talking about earlier, what we've done is we calculated, for them it was a 25-year period, how many tons our woodlands would theoretically sequester over a period of 25 years. We then said to the corporate, this is how many tons, or they said it doesn't matter which way around. They were then, in effect, buying those tons up front. They're called pending issuance units. Doesn't matter what they're called, PIUs. So they are bought up front. Then as the woodland grows, the Woodland Carbon Code verifies that woodland at years 5 and 15 and 25 and every 10 years. And it in effect comes and checks what your woodland has actually sequestered during that time. At that point, so let's say at 15 years, it's got X number of tons. In effect, you say, right, they have now been verified as being in existence. So that PIU turns into a woodland carbon unit, a WCU. And in effect, in this case, because it's already been pre-bought, it then just gets registered and retired. If you haven't pre-sold it at that stage, you can sell it. You can sell it at any point. So what Blenheim did is they pre-sold 25 years worth. At the end of the 25 years worth, anything beyond that is theirs to sell again at whatever price they sell at then. So let's say at Blenheim, I can't tell you what the price was, but let's say it was 40 quid a ton. They've sold it at 40 quid a ton. Blenheim got the income from that up front. At the end of 25 years, Blenheim can go and sell any carbon that's going to be produced after that if they want to, or they might inset it for their own use, but they can sell it at whatever price they like, or whatever price they can sell it at that stage. It's likely to go up. And that, I think, was the question in the chat is, when do you sell? Do you sell now, or do you wait for that price to go up? You know, if you look at the carbon market, they say it's going to go up to 75 quid, 100 quid, 175 quid. By 2030, it might be 150 quid a ton. Do you wait? I would say, no, you're better to get some money than you might not. But on the other hand, don't sell all of it. You know, so I would, if I were doing it, I would do a proportion of my land and plant it and sell some of it up front, and I'd keep the rest for myself. So it's you're hedging your bets, and also by having planted the trees, you're then creating those carbon units that you can sell at a later date.
Yeah, that's really that's great. They're lovely. Thank you. No, I think that is incredibly helpful. These fledgling markets, just to return to those for a second, and I'd love to all three of you to give me some thoughts on this. So at Hampton, we've done our environmental audit, and actually the next piece of advice to us was create a website, put them out there, just do it in a very generic way, but tell people what you've got, because, and it's so true in everything in life, I think. And unless you put your head over the parapet, actually nobody knows what you've got. And in the same way that we market beef or we market our hops, we've got to start marketing basically our natural capital. And I would very much appreciate all three of your views on that idea that individuals or organizations or farmers need to get out there and start marketing what they've got themselves. Dan, how do we stand on this?
Yeah, absolutely agree. I mean, I think what these markets do is to help with the kind of monitoring and reporting and verification of these benefits. So things like the Woodland Carbon Code provide absolute assurance to off-takers, people who are kind of buying these units to offset their carbon emissions, that they're high integrity. As Neil was saying, it's conservative. There are all sorts of buffer zones built in case, you know, trees burn down or whatever. There's a kind of centrally held buffer of reserve credits to guard against issues like that. So it really provides kind of purchasers of these credits with assurances that they are achieving the carbon benefits in that instance. Similarly, with biodiversity net gain, there's a DEFRA metric that really kind of helps establish the impacts that a developer makes on biodiversity, and then at the other end helps the farmer or landowner know what they need to do in terms of offsetting and then providing the 10% net gain to replace that. And that provides the developer who's purchasing the units with that absolute assurance. So I think that's the way these markets are helpful in terms of putting out there what can be kind of purchased by people looking to offset or provide a net gain from their environmental impacts.
Yeah, really helpful. Mark, could I bring you in on this one?
Thank you, Bill.
Clients of yours that, you know, you're dealing with almost both sides of this conundrum, I think, and I'm sure you're bringing both sides together wherever possible. So any experience you have of that would be much appreciated.
Thank you, Bill. First, I'd say that this is a developing situation, an evolving number of schemes, and colleagues on the panel have alluded to peatland codes and woodland codes. There's a wetland code that we are also involved in looking at as well to see where that can come into fruition. It is complicated, and like all these schemes where there's some subsidy or some support, filling the forms is never easy. But in terms of establishing value for farmers, which is the original question, I think, Bill, that is essential. If you can find out what your baseline is as a landowner through your environmental audit that you had, or through equivalent habitat surveys, and you establish what your baseline is, you know then therefore what you can offer. And that brings a value to it that you can then compare with other schemes that you're using on the farm or the woodland or wherever it is you have. One of the key things that we're looking at the moment with customers, back to their key objectives, is a little bit of something that Neil described a few minutes ago, and that is that when to realize the value. So if you're an investor and you're looking to buy some credits or buy some carbon or offset your own carbon by buying credits, etc. The Woodland Carbon Code is an established scheme. The biodiversity net gain units is something that's exists. It's on the horizon. It's being evolved. The 3.0 metric has been developed by DEFRA and is now out in the marketplace. And we always say to potential investors, it sort of rather depends on when you want to realize that money. For biodiversity net gain, once you've established the optimal habitat creation, which gives you an uplift from your existing baseline, you might be able to realize some units. The units themselves currently valued at anything between 10 and 25,000 per unit, depending on where you are in the country. And that will have a value to the construction trade who need to offset when they're building new buildings, and they need to create that 10%, or in Surrey, probably 20% uplift in biodiversity net gain. Now that sort of value and revenue, in theory, comes quite an early stage in the project, but you end up realizing that value at the front end, and perhaps not so much down the line. So you're betting on taking the value straight away as an investor, rather than through the woodland carbon units, where you might hedge, as Neil said, that the carbon price could be up in the hundreds 15 years down the line, in which case it might be 10 times the value, but you're taking a gamble down the line. It's a little difficult for investors to really get their heads around this, because most investors want to here and now. Any corporate investor will know they're looking for a 3 to 5 year payout on anything they invest in. So ultimately, it's really about what is the longer term objective of the investor themselves, and then matching that to what the landowner can realize in terms of sort of baseline value at the time. It's a little complicated. I know one of the questions says, how do you do it? Or, is it confusing? Is it the facilitators that end up having to do it for you, etc.? And at the moment, the answer is yes. I think, you know, with the likes of Niel and the Forest Canopy Foundation, you've got an amazing amount of expertise in the marketplace to be able to sort of pull all these things together. But it's very much a developing, excuse the pun, landscape. And a lot of our expertise, we're all learning on the hoof, trying to understand both ends of that particular argument, both in terms of the landowner and in terms of the investor. And in due course, I think a lot of these schemes will begin to meld together. So you end up with maybe an environmental scheme rather than a woodland scheme or a peat scheme or something else down the line. I don't think there's any rush at this stage, but I would definitely be persuading and influencing landowners to get that baseline habitat valuation done at the front end.
Thank you, Mark. I knew I'd learn lots tonight. That's marvelous. One interesting one, Mark, going back to what you were just saying, and Daniel, you may be able to help us on this. Where do we all share this information? You know, Niel's brought up the blending estate. I'm sure there are examples all around the country of really good work that's being done, and everybody wants to know or hear of other examples. And you know, most marketplaces have got that information flow, and I just wonder how that is going to be promoted. How is that going to work over the next 10, 15 years? If I want to know the price of wheat, I look in the back of Farmers Weekly. And that gives me some, if I want to know the price of pigs, I know that there'll be a report on pig prices throughout the country. But this is so big, so diverse. I'd be really interested in both your views as to how this goes forward, so that people actually have a confidence in these markets. Mark, can I come back to you on that?
Yes, for sure. I mean, what to some extent we're betting against is the price of carbon down the line. And currently there is not a carbon tax per se, but we're fairly certain that at some point carbon will become taxable, and therefore getting into the game, as it were, and understanding how to reduce and then offset your carbon footprint is something you shouldn't avoid. I think in terms of some of the sort of mutual knowledge sharing or knowledge transfer, it's a very good question, Bill. I'm not sure yet that the market itself necessarily has a lot of those answers, although you can find a lot of information on the Woodland Carbon Code website. You can talk to individuals, companies that are already doing it, like ourselves or Niel and others. But because the schemes themselves are sort of developing, I'm not sure we're quite ready yet for that particular central knowledge transfer scheme, as it were. What I would say, though, is that, and a point maybe I should have made earlier, is that a lot of this, we deal in reducing first and offsetting. I just keep wanting to make that point, that you want to get your carbon footprint down as much as you can first before you look to do the offset, which is part of this discussion. And in all honesty, the availability of land to do this could be quite a push and quite a struggle, particularly in southern England, and possibly definitely in Surrey. Finding land that has a value that we can apply this particular type of investment into could be a reasonable challenge. There's going to be tension between other uses of land, in particular for farming itself. And whilst we aren't quite yet sure about the value of carbon, it's quite difficult to see where the value really lies yet. And there are some sort of market prices, as you probably know, in terms of the last auction price for the Woodland Carbon Codes. Previous year, it was about £17 or £19 or something similar. The price of carbon in Europe at the moment is getting on for €60. And so that's the sort of estimated cost of carbon. So we can see it's rising. We're not quite sure yet where it's going to end up. But in terms of finding a sort of central knowledge transfer opportunity, I think we're probably not quite there or have enough information yet.
Yeah, no, thanks, Mark. That's right. Dan, can I bring you in on this? How does DEFRA see this panning out?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's a really good point, because markets rely on good quality data and good information in order to grow and thrive. So I mentioned the Financing Nature Recovery Coalition earlier on. So this is headed up by the Broadway Initiative, Green Finance Institute and Finance Earth. They are coming up with recommendations about how these markets should be kind of governed, operated, and that kind of thing. So really looking forward to the recommendations they come up with, and hope that, you know, this thing about data and information is central to that. I also mentioned, you know, the learnings that we want to see coming out of the Natural Environment Investment Readiness Fund project. We really want to make those widely available. So whether that's in terms of, you know, investment strategies, prices, case studies, legal contracts and things like that, really keen to promote those through kind of knowledge sharing and things like that. And yes, we are, again, partnering with the Esme Fairbairn Foundation, the Ecosystems Knowledge Network and the Green Finance Institute to have a kind of public-facing knowledge exchange platform, which will include you know, webinars like this, case studies and things like that, so we can really help to yeah, develop the markets, hopefully.
That is really encouraging, Dan. Thank you for that. Neil, I'm sorry we missed you for a couple of minutes.
Sorry, I dropped out. I mean, it was, yes, so Dan's comment just then on the Greening Finance Institute and things like that, and the Broadway Initiative, that's really good, because actually as a private sector, we're being involved in that as well. So that's, again, a really good way of this collaboration. So we've been involved right the way through for about the last 6 to 12 months in inputting that, meeting them for various sort of discussion panels, and helping support the whole drive behind it. And I think this marketplace, I think what we're going to end up with, and again, this is a little bit what came out from the Broadway Initiative, sort of their findings almost, is that we'll end up with I'm hoping we'll end up with a landowner having potential benefits that he can sell. So they might be flood alleviation, it might be carbon, it might be whatever. He'll go into a marketplace, and then that marketplace is somewhere where people can go and buy. And it might be that the government buys one bit, but the private sector buy another bit. Or you can bundle them or stack them. So bundling means you buy 2 or 3 together. Stacking means you can, you know, they're stacked and you can sell them separately. So I think that marketplace is evolving. Carbon's the one we know about. BNG is coming in, and the others will follow. But I think we'll end up with a marketplace that will be quite exciting. As a landowner, you go in with in effect, if you're a farm shop, you're going in with your produce. You're going to go and sell it, and various other people can buy it off you. So it's going to be a very different way of looking at it, but quite exciting.
You're right, Neil. Thanks. That's a good example, good description of what can be happening. One area I'm quite interested, all 3 of your thoughts on, which has been always called to sort of talk to me about charismatic carbon, where actually you're looking at a company who might say, okay, we want to really be involved with this particular piece of land. We want to know more. So take a farm. Say, you know, a farm that's got some tree planting on it, it's got some good natural capital assets, and that company says, actually, we'd like more than just to buy some credits. We'd like to get our office team involved in some tree planting. We'd like them to help lay hedges. We'd like, you know, do you think this is a way forward as well? Mark, can we start with you?
Very much so, Bill. We've done quite a bit of this with clients in tree planting, and part of it is about the education. And there's a lot of benefits in terms of being out and active and whatever. And just to, sort of anecdotally for you guys, one of the things that happens at the beginning of any tree planting day is you get a collection of people often wearing ties and suits arriving in the middle of a woodland where you're handing over a shovel and a tree guard, and you're saying, right, follow me, this is what we're going to do. And typically there's a reasonable amount of cynicism at the front end, but that lasts about 20 minutes. So engaging people in doing their own tree planting is the most incredibly sensible and straightforward and obvious way to get engagement about being able to talk and describe and to articulate exactly why it's necessary and the benefits of doing it. So at any stage with any client, as part of an arrangement to invest in doing woodlands, we would almost insist that there is a participation element to that, so that they're also fully engaged.
Yeah, absolutely. That, I mean, exactly what's needed. Dan, what's your thought on this?
Yeah, couldn't agree more. I think, active participation like that has huge amounts of benefits in terms of, really kind of driving home the understanding of the kind of issues on the ground that farmers and landowners are facing every day. It's got great mental health and physical well-being benefits as well. It can, be a kind of corporate income stream as well for corporates want to provide these days out is another useful income stream as well. And yeah, volunteering is always to be encouraged as well. So yeah, sounds great.
Yeah, Neil, I'm sure you've had examples.
Yeah, I think it's great. Last year we had a company exactly that. They wanted to do a little bit as a sort of company do. They came out and planted, and we thought it was going to be a one-off. By the sort of end of the day, the chief exec said that was so good. Can we do it again next year? That's been such a good sort of bonding company team building exercise. So no, I think there'll be a lot of it. I think, I'd love to get kids involved more. I think we should start at the bottom. So forest schools, we're huge advocates of forest schools. I think if we can get the kids involved from an early stage, they get the parents involved. So it's, we need to get the new generation really, really involved right from the start.
And can you see an income stream, direct income stream for those companies, or is it more about?
No, I don't think I can. I think actually it's probably you can't. We wouldn't charge them for it, so it probably is slightly, from our point of view, is probably more of a cost. But actually, the whole process of getting them involved and getting them excited about it is well worth it. So I think, like the Morgan Sindel one we're doing at Blenheim, I think they will come out for a day out with their staff and their head office people. But we won't charge them, but it's part of the whole process for them. And they've got already, they haven't even been out, but their team are so excited about it. They're planning 4 open days this winter to come and plant. They've had publicity. It's coming up higher in the agenda, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. No, it sounds great. It's just, again, it's monetizing these sorts of activities, I think, because there is a value, and I'm sure we're all seeing more values coming through. Look, I think it's probably time now to nip on to a couple of questions that we've been sent over. And I think one interesting one is how do we help farmers tap into these new funding streams? They barely have time to fill in the current payment forms. How to support farmers through this additional admin and help them innovate? Are DEFRA expecting intermediaries to grow this space? Daniel, I'm sure, Dan, you've had this question from you, put to you a number of times. How do farmers find the time? How do people find the time to do this? Which is a really fair question. Because it so often depends on resource. And, a family farm working pretty hard to try and make ends meet, to actually get through the farming operation. It takes time, and there's not a lot of spare time to do these things. How did DEFRA recognize? I'm sure they recognize it. In what sort of way?
Yeah, absolutely. I have huge sympathy with this. It's a time of great change. We've got the new environmental land management system coming online. There's things like net gain coming down the track. Carbon's going up the agenda. It's a complicated and fast emerging field. So I really do have sympathy here. I mean, in terms of intermediaries, this was one of the things we wanted to grow through the Natural Environment Investment Readiness Fund. So we drew inspiration from the social investment sector. So if you remember big society capital and all that kind of thing that started sort of 10 or 15 years ago, and is now a kind of multi-billion pound per annum investment market. There was a lot of investment readiness support to kind of get that market going. And that did lead to intermediaries coming into the market. And I think the more intermediaries that we see, kind of high quality intermediaries that can both speak the language of finance and talk to investors, but also understand, the needs of farmers and land managers, understand natural environment policy, and kind of how to protect our natural environment, people that can kind of bridge that gap, bring those two worlds together are invaluable. So I mentioned Finance Earth being a part of the Nature Financing Coalition. They are kind of advising a number of our first round Natural Environment Investment Readiness Fund projects. We've worked with Triodos Corporate Finance as well on the pilot projects and on some of the NERF projects that I've mentioned. And I think there are more and more of these kind of organizations and intermediaries coming into the market that can help advise farmers and land managers and kind of package projects up into a kind of easily digestible deal, if you like, so that farmers can really kind of assess whether it's for them or not. And as I say, bringing together the world of kind of environment and finance, which traditionally haven't always met in the middle. Now I think that's changing.
Yeah, so right. Very good point. Niel, anything on your front from that?
No, I don't think so, apart from to say exactly that. There'll be intermediaries helping. You know, on the forestry side, that's the bit we offer, in effect, to say we can help untangle the complexities of the woodland grant schemes and the woodland carbon code, and deliver a very simple package in sort of English. So yes.
And then the final question I think we've probably got time for this afternoon is I think we've all seen this. Many people like me are more than a little concerned that the complexity and lack of public transparency of carbon offsetting, net gain and the development of the markets based on natural capital are more about profit to a landowner and justifying continued damage than actually about addressing the real world problems of countryside management aimed at protecting wildlife and facilitating public access. Jargon and complexity disguise public and biodiversity need. Really interesting question. Mark, have you got a couple of seconds on that?
Yes, very, very quickly. In order to deliver biodiversity net gain or even the woodland carbon code, there's an audit, and those habitat surveys in particular in the biodiversity world are measured by a trained ecologist and then signed off. And there is a fairly stringent mechanism for making sure that there is a broad habitat creation rather than it being just one thing or the other just for the pure value. So there isn't a poacher and gamekeeper thing here. They are audited regularly, and there is a government matrix, the 3.0 metric, as it were, which was designed by Natural England. So I wouldn't concern myself about that, because I think the checks and balances are in place.
I think good, absolutely right. I think the interesting thing from a farming point of view is with the end of basic payment scheme, how are farmers and landowners going to, and managers, how are they going to, which bits of all the things that we've been talking about today are they actually going to pick out and do? You know, it's not just going to be tree planting. It's not just going to be this. It is, you're absolutely right, Mark, I'm sure. It's going back to your original audit and seeing where the values lie. Is it in this little bit of copse here? Is it through public access there? Is it, how is it going to happen? And I think there's a whole raft of things. Neil, you're nodding.
No, I was just thinking that one of the questions was, how's it all going to fit together, I suppose. And I think the important thing is, the whole thing about this is we're not going to stop farming. We're not going to stop food production. We really got to think about where you're going to do these things on the land that is appropriate to that. And so it's if you've got an awkward corner, you've got an awkward bit of field that doesn't really farm very well, those are the ones to look at for trees. Wetland habitat that might not be so good for farming again, you might go into wetland habitat and something for biodiversity again. But at the end of the day, we still need to farm and we still need to produce food. And that should always be counted very high up in the list.
That is a wonderful summary. I reckon we're at about 5:30, which is probably about time to wrap up as far as I can see. So look, I must thank you all very, very much indeed, because it's been a fascinating chance to have a conversation with all three of you. Thank you very much, Mark, Dan and Neil, for your input and for your candid comments. I mean, really, really helpful. Thank you very much, and for putting over your points of view so well. I thought it was a fascinating conversation. So with the roundtables concluded, we now move on to the action part of the Regenerative Surrey programme. In the next stage, we'll be running a series of workshops which map new nature-based solutions within Surrey. These projects will be allocated an advisor to develop the proposals and get the project investment ready. So to be part of this new approach, look out for the Regenerative Surrey newsletter, which should arrive in your inbox, I think, next week.